We're going to do this on my Brother 260 because it's the bulkiest machine that I have clean and ready right now in a well-lit position. Remember that you must make sure that whatever adjustment there is on the machine that allows it to knit needles back from hold being the all the way forward position, is set correctly. Right now I have it set to hold. Nothing happens. If I move it to in, it will knit back from hold. I'll show you some photos of other machines set correctly in a moment. This is a vintage Brother machine. The all the way forward #1 position knits back from hold, but keep all the way forward in mind. On this and similar machines, it's the #2 position, not this one, but this one. Here's an artisan not knitting back from hold, but when we change this setting, it will. And this is why I told you not to think of 1 and 2 so much as back and forward, because whatever the number is, if it's a side lever that moves forward and back, it's more likely to be the forward position. In my experience of many machines from many eras, that has been the most common experience. The back position leaves those needles in hold. So that's step #1. Now let's move a few needles all the way forward and begin with a loop knotted on into the yarn. You want a loop that's about the same size as a stitch would be. And if your carriage is on the right, which is easier for most right-handed people, hang the loop on the left. Now make the cursive letter E around each needle, and this is the tricky part. In a minute I'll move the camera and show you how I really do it. But there's a tendency for new knitters to get this overly tight. If you do, the carriage is going to have trouble knitting it back. So what I'm doing so you can see the loops is pressing with my fingertip from the non-wrapping hand on the underside and helping to control them without overly tightening. Loop, control. Letter E, control. And so on across. Now I'm going to thread the yarn tail straight from here into the carriage. You won't be able to see it. And always remember to snap the gate shut. Now if all is well, if your tension is correct, your yarn is suitable, and your sponge bar is in good condition, knitting across will make true stitches. And it did. And now we can hang claw weights and continue to knit. Everything I said matters. The condition of the sponge bar, which is housed right underneath here. It goes in from either end, but it should be underneath here, and I have a video on changing it. That matters. The fact that you've got the stitch dial size set at a good size for your yarn matters. The fact that the yarn is appropriate and towards the middle weight of what will work on the machine is much the best for beginners. And probably the most important factor is that your E-wraps were a nice, even, not too tight, not too loose width. Now here's a trick. I can knit back from hold again because there's not much yet to hang the weights on. But knitting back from hold lowers the likelihood of dropping stitches. And generally on this machine, if I do that twice after the cast on, I can continue knitting without a fuss, even without weights, although claw weights are recommended here and here. You just saw this machine knit nicely, and I get this question a lot. My machine isn't making any stitches. See, it's made a loop on each of the needles, but it's not a closed loop at the bottom. That's the function of the E-wrap, to create something that functions like a stitch. Now, just because I love you, I'm going to do something unthinkable. You get a mess. Some of them tried to knit off, some of them completely failed, and shortly you'll get a jam. You just can't start like that. There are occasions when the E-wrap isn't a very good choice because your yarn is very slippery or has big slubs or is stiffish. I'll show you a trick. To do the trick, you'll need a comb similar to this one, and we're going to set every other needle across the span I'm working with completely out of work. And do what I told you not to do, knit across. However, once you hang the comb in those loops, the comb itself is closing them for temporary, but we'll go ahead and get them closed for real by now bringing the alternate set of needles forward. I didn't have my comb evenly spaced, so let me fix that. That's what you saw happening. If you move the comb, be sure not to get it stuck on the working yarn, as I just did. Now, from this point, half of the stitches really are stitches. They're closed at the bottom. The other half are not yet, but the comb is helping them pretend to be. And I should be able to knit. This is a very ugly cast on. Not recommended for most things, but for starting in waste yarn, it's terrific. If this was my waste yarn, not my real yarn, this is make-believe, remember, I would now change to my real yarn and E-wrap. Let me show you. Normally we do this with a length of ravel cord. It was sold with the machines. It's very firm, skinny, and slippery. I'm using a fake substitute. It's just a scrap of skinny yarn. I'm going to thread my length into the carriage and knit one row across. So now we have a row of something that does not match at all and is slick and firm, and we'll be able to pull it out later. I do not want the next row to knit because I want to be able to E-wrap left to right. That's just easier for me, particularly the way I have the camera set up. Therefore, on the brother, I can push both cart buttons. But whatever you can do on your machine to get a free pass, or you can even take the carriage off at that end, move it to this end, and reseat it. It's okay. It's just I want to knit in one direction. It is possible to do it the other way. I just prefer to demonstrate to you this way. Plus, I cannot get to where I need to be to do it the other way because the camera's got that spot. Now we would do exactly what we did before. So you may ask, what's the difference? The difference is that with weight already on existing knitting and existing knitting already on the machine, the carriage has a much easier time performing the task of knitting the row from the E-wraps. So I'm pushing them back. It may knit through them even if I don't, but it's much more likely to succeed with them back next to the gate pegs. That's true even if you don't have gate pegs. A hobby machine can do this as long as it will knit back from hold. There are ways to E-wrap with a machine that won't knit back from hold, but that's a subject for another day. The click you heard is me releasing those part buttons because we don't want a free pass now, we want to knit. And I have my carriage set on end so it will knit. And now we're ready to go. So that's a way to E-wrap, even if you have a yarn or a situation that makes it difficult. And here is the ravel cord separating the waist knitting, which would normally be another color just to help you. A leftover yarn is fine, from the main knitting. Down at the bottom here is how we cast on the waist yarn. And that's why I told you it's ugly and not suitable for most projects. Although it does make a good drawstring cast on if you have the need of that. And here is how the ravel cord allows us to separate the main yarn from the waist yarn. Mine just broke because it's not the real thing. It's not really strong enough. And if that happens to you, you can pick it out stitch by stitch. I'm going to give it another try. Usually the right stuff does what that just did, just pull straight out. Now watch. There's the last row of waist yarn knitting. You can really see the stitches still there. And there is my E-wrap going up to the main knitting. That's how that can help you with E-wrapping. Now there's no reason to be too fussy about your technique. However, I want you to see how I, and most experienced knitters probably, normally move when E-wrapping. I'm sorry the camera can't be in as perfect a position for you to view, but I hope we can get this done in a way you can see it. Hang the loop on the left needle. Now normally my hand goes above the needles, and I use my thumb to push back and control the ease. This allows me to get a good E, letter E, without having to over tighten it. The problem is if you get a nice loose one and you don't have another hand working, getting the next one on is difficult even for an experienced knitter. But with one hand securing your latest E, it's a piece of cake. I'm not going to say you'll win at this first time. You probably won't. I didn't. Why should you be better? But seriously, it's one of those physical tasks that with a little practice starts out tricky and then becomes automatic. It's not going to give you trouble forever. So there are a couple of helps with managing your E-wrap cast on. As a little bonus, I want to help you out with the sponge bar. You can't see it, so people think it's not there. In fact, it's running along under here, and it's pressing the needles down the way my finger is, but it's inside a channel right here. You access that channel through this opening. To get the sponge bar out, you normally have to push it with a suitably sized piece of dowel or a carefully shielded screwdriver point, and it'll come out the far end of the machine. And here's mine, partially emerging. This is a studio machine, and there is its opening. If you doubt that your machine has a sponge bar, chances are 99 to 1 that you are mistaken. People think so, and there are machines that use another system, but virtually all Japanese-made machines use a sponge bar in that spot, and without it, the machine will not function well.